DTFF.
Once again, here's Drinking and Talking Fantasy Football with your host, Jake Trowbridge and Dustin Lunt.
All right, let's get ourselves in the right areas here, because God forbid we do a stream here with us being on opposite sides of the screen. That would just throw off the whole shebang here. But thank you for joining us, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Welcome back to DTFF. We are excited. We've got another great episode for you. Going to be talking red flags about fantasy players this week. We each have a player from each fantasy relevant position. So that'll be good. Talking about that, we'll get into that more shortly. But before we get into all of that, gotta say hi, salute my co-host Jake. How are you doing this evening, sir?
Salute your shorts. That's a TV show that used to be on Nickelodeon.
It was.
I don't know why it came up just now, but it did. I'm doing good. We are in the thick of the off-season. Training camp officially underway. All of the one-handed catches are being on full display on social media. This is the time where we thrive.
That's right. So this show is very timely. Speaking of these one-handed catches and these flashes we see in the preseason and in training camp, tonight's show will give us a little bit of a tap the brakes, a little bit, possibly on some of these guys.
A wet blanket on these hype fires that get out of control this time of the year.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Jake, I don't know if you saw this. It's not on the show sheet, but literally 17 minutes ago, breaking news, DJ Moore and the Bears reached a 4-year, $110 million extension, includes $82.6 million guaranteed.
Hachi.
What do you take away from this extension here?
Well, I would say that the Bears have their wide receiver one for now and beyond. I don't think there's any indication that there's another guy that's not DJ Moore who's going to be leading that pack. And obviously that's been a point of contention all offseason. They've made some staggering additions via free agency and otherwise. And I think this clarifies the pecking order a little bit for us. We'll touch on this a little bit later on the show, but what do you think? Should we be taking a lot from this?
No, I think it just really solidifies that DJ Moore is a long-term player on their squad that they want involved. He's obviously young enough that they think he's going to be an integral part. They want him here for the long haul with Caleb Williams so that they can grow together. And yeah, he is the number one. Whether that continues after the season and Roma Dunze kind of takes over that number one position as he grows out of his rookie season here. Remains to be seen, but at least we know that the Bears definitely have plans. They want DJ Moore. They felt the need to extend him and give him a very nice contract. So I'd be very comfortable drafting him. Do you think, based on this news, that his ADP might creep up a few spots, or do you think the average fan isn't really going to take this into account? It's just like, okay, yeah, whatever.
I really just think that his dynasty price tag went up a little bit. I don't really think his redraft ADP is going to maybe a couple of baby steps forward to help split him out of the pack of Keenan and Rome, but I don't really think it's going to have a strong impact. I will say, look, this isn't fantasy related, but as a Packer fan, don't you just feel like this is a little bit of them getting jealous of the big Jordan Love news that popped off recently? And he's the highest paid quarterback. And now the Bears just can't let him have that and have to swoop in with this news of their own. That's what it feels like to me. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna bring up the whole Jordan Love contract thing this evening just because, that'd just be a little too on brand for us, and I don't want people accusing us of being homers and playing favorites by any stretch of the imagination.
Never.
But yeah, that would be very spiteful of the Bears just to do something like this, just to try to one up it. Falling flat, of course, because nothing could ever one up what the Packers do. But it was a valiant effort. I will give them that.
They tried. They tried.
Yeah. So Albert in the chat saying hi. Jamie
Hello,
also in the
Albert.
chat says, "What up, guys? What are we drinking tonight?" Jake, this is your beer this evening. Why don't you let Jamie and the rest of the folks know what we are drinking this evening?
What a freaking segue, Jamie. Way to be on the ball and ready for our next bit here. This one is called Summer Nights. It's a lovely little design package. You got that juicy peach booty right on the front can there. This is a wheat ale that is brewed with both peaches and black tea. This sounded very interesting to
Hmm.
me. It's Central Waters Brewing. The art, by the way, is by Big Shot Robot. I just want to call that out because I do love the art
Well,
here.
and you can tell it's not a typical Central Waters artwork.
Yeah,
Like
it's
I
different.
wouldn't
It's
have thought this was
jazzy.
Central Waters because this doesn't look like their typical can art. So
Yeah,
yeah,
subtle.
that
What do you
this is good though.
What do
I
you
like
think?
this.
Yeah, it's
Um,
interesting, right?
do you know how much I am trying not to sing "Summer Nights"
Yeah.
from
You,
Greece?
you can only do
Uh,
like 5
I
seconds. That's as much as we can get away with copyright wise.
well, I'm trying to belt out the last part, where they're
Sure.
duetting, and I can't do that to our fans. Maybe if enough people hype me up in Canton, I could do it when we're
There
there
you
in
go.
just over a week.
Yeah.
But I will not do that tonight with limited booze in my system. Let's put it that way.
All right. All we got to know though, I got to know, are you Sandra D or are you Johnny T in this thing? Which
Johnny
side of
T.
Summer Nights? All right. I didn't know. Didn't know if you're a Zuko
Yeah.
or if you're a Sandra D. Everybody has a different mode here. Greek Freak, by the way, in the chat, coming in with bourbon and Coke here. I haven't had a good bourbon and Coke in quite some time. I've gotten away from the sweeter things of cocktails. I like to mix with soda now to feel like an adult. But I kind of miss a good bourbon and Coke. Not gonna lie.
Yeah, I haven't had one of those for quite some time either. Typically, when I'm drinking bourbon, I just tend to do it either neat or with just a little bit of ice. I don't tend to
Yeah.
do a lot of mixers anymore when I'm hitting whiskeys and bourbons, but yeah, those are good though.
Right?
May have to
Also,
change that up.
bourbon and root beer, Greek Freak in the chat. If you've never tried it before,
Ooh.
whiskey and root beer is a phenomenal combination. You will never go back. But do we want to talk about what some other people have been drinking as one of our other segments, Dustin? You get what I'm putting
Are you
down?
talking about our drunk trade of the week,
Yes, sir.
perhaps? Oh, let's do it.
Drunk, 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 hammered drunk, 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 drunk.
Drunk Trade of the Week.
As we often do, we like to venture into the depths of Reddit to find some fun to talk about in terms of our drunk trades. By the way, I just have to call out in the chat. Both me and Dustin were
Yeah,
quickly in the chat
we're
responding
on
to
it.
Jamie. God, within split seconds of each other. Anyways, this drunk trade of the week, this comes from Reddit user Painotron. This is a 12-team, one quarterback, full PPR Dynasty League. Painotron says, we were both drunk, obviously. I sent JSN, Jameson Williams, and a 2025 second round pick for Chris Olave, a 2025 third, and a 2026 third. This was done without any trade calculators, just an old fashioned and good natured drunken haggle. The good part is that in the cold, sober light of day, we both still liked it. Dustin, before we even get into the actual trade itself, I just got to say, I love this. I love the old fashioned approach. Nobody sending screenshots of this trade calculator says that actually I
Yep.
should get this, and then all that bozo-ness that happens. But we are in a bit of a negative episode today, so I thought it'd be nice to highlight a trade that both parties were still fond of to
Oh,
imbue a little bit
absolutely.
of positivity into this thing. But with that said, what do you think of the actual trade here?
I think it's one where it depends on your team build. I can see how both of them still liked it. Let's put it that way. I think I would prefer the JSN, JMO in the second side over the Olave side. Olave is obviously the best player in the trade, which is typically what you want to do. You want to be receiving the best player. He's worth a first plus, maybe two firsts, depending on your league and what how people value him. The thirds are just kind of whatever, especially the 26, since that's like a couple years out. It's like, okay, whatever. But a JSN, he was high draft capital just last season. I'm expecting him to take a big step forward this year. Jameson Williams, news out of camp, best shape of his life, catching balls all over the place, looking great. And then you're getting a second on top of it. So I like the JSN side, uh, just because, like I said, I think JSN is going to take a big step forward this year. JMO, he could have his spots. Might be a decent flex play this year, a bye week fill in, and you're getting a second on top of it. I love Olave. I don't love his quarterback. And I know there's not a ton of other options there in New Orleans either. So he could just be peppered with targets, kind of old school Michael Thomas there in New Orleans, like we used to see. But Derek Carr is a far cry from Drew Brees. So that's why I'm a little bit hesitant with the Olave side. But what do you think, Jake?
First of all, this is a guy here who knows how to talk about trades. My goodness, those trade blocked episodes are just they're coming into full fruition. If you haven't
They
checked it
sure
out,
are.
Trade Blocked every Thursday night via Club Fantasy. Check it out. But I will say, Chris Olave is a weird guy, a very weird guy to evaluate. And I feel like he's a little bit reminiscent of T. Higgins from a couple, 3 years ago. Nobody really quite knows what to do with him. Ostensibly, yes, he's great. Before Jamar Chase came to town for the Bengals, I was like, yeah, T. Higgins, he's great, and he's the number one. But also, is he an elite, quote unquote, receiver? I don't know. So in dynasty leagues, it was like, yeah, I definitely want a first plus for T. Higgins, as you're saying you would want for Chris Olave. I just don't know that everybody's willing to give that up for him right now. So I do think
Hmm.
these types of player for player trades with Olave probably going to be the way to get it done for him. JSN, I do have high hopes for, as you do. Last year, it's not what anybody wanted. We'll really have to see this year. It is make or break for him, in my opinion, for Dynasty, because if he doesn't get beyond Tyler Lockett this year, oh yeah, he's going to go all the way down in Dynasty value. So this is a pretty risky trade, I honestly think. I do agree that I would rather have the Olave side, because I don't think Jameson Williams is going to get there as the best fourth passing option on a team in the NFL. So yeah, give me Olave, but I'm glad everybody's happy about it. I'm glad both parties woke up the next day. Nobody yelled, nobody screamed, nobody threatened to leave the league over it. It sounds like it worked out, and that's what's important.
Hmm.
Get it?
Definitely.
That was positive.
Definitely. Yes. Well, Jake, should we get into the main event here, talking red flags, or is there any other news or anything else here? Since training camp is starting, we've got the Hall of Fame game, first preseason game here Thursday night, a couple nights. Anything else you want to touch base with here? Any concerns? Any wow plays you saw, or should we just move into the main event?
There's going to be plenty of time for us to overanalyze what's happening in training camp right now. Honestly, there's only one extra bit that we haven't talked about already, and I'm going to address that with my very first player anyhow. So feels like a smooth a transition as any.
All right, well then let's do that, Jake. And just so everybody knows, when we're talking red flags, we are not saying avoid these players because every player has value at some point in the draft. What we're talking about here is at their current ADP, which is all we can work off of is current ADP. We have concerns about them being drafted at that spot. Correct?
Correct.
So that's where we're basing it. We're not saying avoid these players overall. That's not what we're saying. But just we just have some slight concerns that we feel like you should know. So Jake, lead us off here with your first player.
Yeah, slight concerns, or maybe more than slight concerns with some players. But Tua Tagovailoa is a guy that I want to talk about desperately on this episode. A guy who, prior to Jordan Love, did get his own contract with the Miami Dolphins. So kudos all around. However, that's another example where I think a small uptick probably for redraft and a large uptick in dynasty based on a contract. Tua Tagovailoa, though, has some big, meaty concerns for me. I think what we do a lot of the time with quarterbacks for fantasy is go, what are the weapons around them? And a lot of the times we just kind of stop there. Go, what are the weapons around these guys? And Tua Tagovailoa is throwing to Tyreek Hill. He's throwing to Jalen Waddle. He now has OBJ as his wide receiver 3. He's got that nice backfield. He's got Mike McDaniel coaching him. He's go to the moon for Tua. And I just want to be cautious here. He is currently going as QB. Oh God, what is it? Not 4, QB 14. Dear God, if he was going as QB 4, I would be all the way out on Tua. He's going as QB 14 right now, right in the mix of Jared Goff range, which is a very interesting range because both of those guys I'm out on, but I chose Tua because he gets more hype every year for fantasy purposes than I think he deserves. For real life, he's fine. But he's thrown to this great cast that he was throwing to last year. It's the same guys. He was QB 19 in points per game last year, throwing to those guys. He led the league in passing yards. He was second in the league in yards per attempt. He was 5th in passing touchdowns, completion percentage, passer rating, 5th lowest sack percentage, 7th in touchdown rate. All these great, wonderful metrics for a pocket passer to have. And he was QB 19 in points per game because he has no rushing upside. Absolutely none. His career high, 128 rushing yards. That's rough. You can't, in the current fantasy climate, you can't do that. Also, this year, yes, it's the same guys as last year, outside of, the OBJ edition, the Jonnu Smith edition, if you're very much into that. But there's also the Jalen Wright addition to the backfield. And I've talked about this before. I'm a big believer in Jalen Wright. I think it was one of the best player to team situations that came out of this recent rookie draft. And they should have a healthy backfield rotation for the first time under Mike McDaniel's tenure. So will they throw as much as Tua was allowed to last season? Probably not. You could make the argument that Tua had to occasionally sit out portions of the fourth quarter because the Dolphins were up so much. I understand that argument. I don't think that part is particularly going to change that much this year. So I'm not backing that part off either. QB 19, there's no upside with Tua. I know you don't have to pay a lot. He's QB 14, but give me so many guys going after him that at least have a chance at upside. Because that's what you need at quarterback. If they don't have upside, who cares? Move on. Stream guys off of the waiver wire who do have good matchups and play that game. But I'm not in on Tua at QB 14. Is that too harsh? Was that too harsh to lead us off, Dustin?
I don't think it was too harsh. We were talking about this Thursday on Trade Blocked. Actually, Tua was our main topic of conversation, and one thing Joel was bringing up is that he feels like the Dolphins could be a little bit more pass heavy than they were last year. They were a much more run heavy team, and that's not something typically McDaniels has done, as you've seen him. So I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that they're going to be more pass heavy, but obviously there's the chance for that volume to be there. But what if all these running backs don't stay healthy like they did last year? I know that didn't seem to bother them They kept running the ball regardless. They were just throwing bodies out there. But I mean, what if it got to a point where they literally couldn't run the ball? I mean, to say that he doesn't have much upside from QB 14 is a little harsh.
Is
I
it
know we got
though?
a comment from Uncle Andy in the draft that says QB 14 is a steal. He has a legit shot at top 5. I don't know about. I mean, top 5, sure, maybe that would be his ceiling if everything actually broke the right way, and it was like a
Mhm.
super pass heavy offense, um, and say there was more dump offs to the running backs instead of them rushing the ball and getting rushing touchdowns, and some of those became passes, maybe. But to say top 5, I think is would be like the absolute 100%
Yeah.
ceiling.
Yeah.
But to say that Tua doesn't have a lot of upside, I disagree with a little bit. I don't think he's mispriced by any means. I think QB 14 is a fair
Mhm.
value for him, just based on the guys above him, especially without that running aspect to him. He just doesn't run the ball. And I wonder too, Jake, do you feel like there's any hangover from him and his concussion concerns, and maybe that's dropping his value a little bit?
I think we've kind of moved past that as a general
Right, I
upfront
agree.
concern.
I just
You
wanted
know,
to just throw it
not
out
like
there
guys
as a,
with
like,
like
what if.
yeah, I think with guys like Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, we're still seeing suppression of value because recent injuries at the forefront still in terms of recovery are there. Not for Tua. I would push back though. We're talking about a lot having to break right for Tua. We're talking about
Mhm,
3 dynamo running backs have to go down with injury, all overlapping each other for him to have to throw
absolutely.
it.
No,
He's
no,
already chucked it out. Again, he led the league in passing yards last season. Not to say he can't improve on that as well, but eventually you hit a cap with just pure
right.
passing, and that's what I'm talking about with Tua. So Albert was curious in the chat, and it's a great question. Who are the quarterbacks
Mhm.
going behind Tua that I would be more interested in from an upside perspective? Let me get your opinion on this. So we've got Justin Herbert going 2 spots behind him. Would you rather have Tua or Justin?
Oh, that's a great question.
Right? It's
Ah,
an interesting one.
ooh, God, I might take Herbert, but that's real, real close. That's
I'm
real
coming
close.
around. I'm coming around, and we'll talk about this in a bit, but I'm coming around on Herbert having more rushing potential than he ever has before. But we've got Herbert, we've got Trevor Lawrence. I would take Trevor over Tua. We've got Kirk Cousins. I would take Kirk Cousins over Tua. We've got Baker Mayfield, which to me is just Tua going
Mm,
later. So I would rather, I'm not saying I'd take Baker over Tua, but just give me the extra 3 rounds of discount and take Baker Mayfield or Will Levis or Geno Smith or even Russell Wilson, who I really like as a sleeper guy for the first half of the year. My point is, again, I just feel like his upside's capped because even going back to 2022, his kind of upside was QB 11 in points per game. I just don't see a
mhm.
path for a guy like this to have that those meaty
So, can
fantasy
I
weeks that really carry up.
yeah, just let me ask you one final question here about Tua.
Sure.
If you
Yeah.
were punting the quarterback position, would you be comfortable taking him as your QB1, or would you rather wait and take some of these other guys that are going even later?
I'd rather wait because you're still not really getting that much value at QB 14. At that
Okay.
point, you play the game. Hopefully, most of your teammates don't draft 2 quarterbacks. And even if they do, I'll scoop up the other value that I perceive and wait for some of those other guys.
All right, fair enough.
Whew. All right.
Do you want me
Who you got?
to lay on you my quarterback red
You lay
flag?
on me whoever you want to lay on me. We got to find a better phrasing for that, by the way. But in the meantime, you put out there who you want.
All right. So my quarterback red flag is one CJ Stroud. And I know this is probably going to be a little contentious just because he is the new hotness. What we saw last year, him coming out as a rookie, was amazing. Like he had an unbelievable season. Currently, he is where is he? QB5 in redraft right now. QB5. He finished last year in total points as QB 11 and 10th overall in points per game average. So what we saw last year, an amazing season, he was still only top 10. For him to reach that number 5 position, I mean, a hell of a lot more is gonna have to go the right way for them. And I know they added Stefon Diggs. That doesn't change that equation a whole lot for me because you saw how prolific that, pass offense was last year. So it just gives him another option to throw to. If anything, it affects the wide receiver distribution and which of these wide receivers you should be drafting at what point in the draft because there's just another option to spread the ball around to. They brought in Joe Mixon. Obviously, Damian Pierce and was it Devin Singletary last year? They weren't doing what they wanted the run game to do. And we talked about Joe Mixon multiple times over this offseason. I think he could have a sneaky good season. He gets the volume. He may not be efficient. He may not be sexy, but they brought him in because he can be that 1A. He can be that guy that can run the ball. And I think they're going to want to get a slightly bit more balanced in their offense than what they were last year. So Joe Mixon's definitely going to be involved. And for CJ Stroud to return that top 5 value, I just I have a hard time seeing him reach that. I mean, he already threw for 4,100 yards. He had just trying to look at some of these stats here. I mean, it's just I just don't understand it. There's plenty of weeks last year where he was under 15 points per game. He had those spike weeks where you saw him have 41 points. He had 30 points. He had 20 points. I mean, there wasn't a lot there that puts him up into that elite level, which drafting him as QB5, that's where you want. And kind of the same point as we're talking about with Tua, he doesn't really have that rushing upside either. He is one of the true like pocket passers. Does he have a little bit of scoot to him? A little bit. Like he can escape the pocket. It's more of I wouldn't even put it at like prime Rogers level of
Mhm.
scoot. Um, but he can escape the pocket, but he doesn't run the ball. So you're losing out on that. They're not probably going to rush him at the goal line like they do with Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen. So you're not even going to be getting goal line rushes. Those are going to go to Joe Mixon, or they're going to be throwing it to one of the 5 receiving options they have on their squad. So I just don't see a world where CJ Stroud returns this top 5 level. Do you agree or you disagree, Jake?
1,000%. I think it's a very similar argument to Tua.
1,000% which way?
I agree.
Do you agree or disagree? 1,000%. No, you gotta say, "Yes, I agree," or "No, I disagree."
I'm just going to leave it up in the air and then leave the podcast. And then that's going to be the end of the thing. It's going to be the last thing I've ever said on this podcast. No, I 1000% agree with it. It is the same deal with Tua. At a certain point, you go, great. They have the weapons, they have the offense. For passing, wonderful. That's still a pendulum that swings week to week if they don't have a rushing upside to bolster that. It's the same deal. If you get 200 rushing yards from CJ Stroud, you are ecstatic. Like that is the type of player that he is. Now, to the earlier question that Uncle Andy posed in the chat, saying QB 14 is a steal for Tua compared to CJ Stroud at QB 5, yes, it is. It absolutely is.
Mhm.
If I had to choose between these two at ADP, it's Tua every single time because they have the
100%.
same range of
100%.
outcomes, I think. Yeah. But I just don't want either is the ultimate thing there.
Yeah. I mean, if he were more in that 10 range of QBs, I'd be all over it then at that ADP, but 5? I mean,
Crazy.
I mean, he's going over here's the next 5 players that are going right after him. You've got Anthony Richardson, Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, Jordan Love, Dak Prescott. Those are the next 5.
Yep. I want them all over CJ Stroud based on what upside that they do have. Guy like Dak Prescott, we've talked about in the past, doesn't rush as much as he used to after the injuries that he dealt with, but he started to a little bit more. He's in a situation, he's going to have to throw it probably more than any other quarterback in the league. So if I'm picking a guy who's going to have the most attempts and yards and all that, I'll go with Dak and take a little bit of that upside too. So yeah, CJ Stroud is just off of my boards. I know I'm not going to be able to draft him. Stinks if he busts out, but I'm willing to take that risk because I don't think there's a ton of risk with avoiding him.
Right. Okay, Jake, who do you have next?
All right. Let's continue down to negative town. Let's talk about everybody's favorite running back. And look, I'm very excited for this guy to be getting all the training camp highlights right now. Nick Chubb endured a gruesome injury. Again, I hope I never have to see that highlight clip come up on my feed from last season, where his knee got bent all the way backwards. He's rehabbing. It looks like he's great. We're getting clips of him just running and looking great running. Nick Chubb, however, is still going to be a 29-year-old running back mid-season who is coming off of, again, a very gruesome injury that nobody should ever have to experience, who never gets targets. He's not a pass catcher. He's the purest of pure running backs that are left in the NFL these days. He averaged just 36 targets per season before last year's injury. Those are meager numbers for a running back. He has historically been a very touchdown-dependent, low RB1. One season, which was in 2022, he was the RB6 in points per game. Prior to that, he was nestled in that RB10 to RB12 finish range. So he was good, obviously. You could start him. You could feel comfortable starting him, get the consistency. But he was rarely a guy that was actually going to win you your week based on that. And now he is older. He is off of an injury. We saw Jerome Ford step in last year and honestly look pretty damn good for the majority of the season. Once he took over, he was actually the RB23 in points per game. He was hit and miss in terms of his efficiency. I will give you that. He was a little bit of the Saquon Barkley of like, I'm either going to bust off a 20-yard run or I'm going to get -2. But we've seen guys like that certainly flourish before. Still not convinced that the Browns aren't going to be more pass heavy or try to be more pass heavy this year. They added Jerry Jeudy. I'm not sold on Jerry Jeudy. I am sold on Amari Cooper becoming like, what did he say? He wants this to be a contract year for him. I expect him to live up to that. So Nick Chubb, it's a great story, but at RB28 and rising very, very quickly, I wouldn't be shocked if by the time we come draft, at the end of August or mid-August or whatever, if he's up in the RB20 range again, because we see more of these training camp highlights and beyond that. And that's too steep of a price for me to pay. Give me Jerome Ford at RB40 and staying stagnant or lowering as we get there. I'm not in on Nick Chubb. Will you take that risk with the Chubbster?
No, I'm out on Chubb for this year, unless he falls like super late into my draft and it's at that point, he's like my fifth running back. Well, then sure, yeah, I'll take the chance on him because at that point the investment's negligible. But where he's going to end up going because of that name value, and especially if he shows out in camp or in preseason this year, he has one play. That's all it's going to take is one play where he busts out a big run for like 20 yards, and people are going to be like, "Oh, he's back." And I just don't trust it, especially a guy that's coming off his second major knee injury in his career. And at his age, we haven't. I mean, I'm not trying to compare him to Derrick Henry, but Derrick Henry is built different. He is a guy that has just defied the odds for years. Someone at his size, Nick Chubb is your more traditional running back, and I just don't see him defying time. And he's always been a very good player. He hasn't been that like uber elite top end running back for years, like we saw out of Adrian Peterson or we saw out of some of these other great running backs. So I just don't believe it, and I'm just not willing to invest in him right now.
Yeah. He's got to be prime Adrian Peterson off of an injury for him to, sort of be worth it for me. And he's just not. Like you said, everybody has their price. As the $1 million man would say, everybody has their price. And if he falls low enough, fine, I guess. It's just not for me.
But that's
But I
just not
wish him
going to
well.
happen.
Yeah, I hope that he
Mhm.
comes back and proves the shit wrong out of me, because that would be a phenomenal story. But not going to make that.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
Who do you want to talk about here?
All right, we'll stick with running backs here. And my running back is Jalen Warren. Um, and this one, I put him on the show sheet. I don't have super strong feelings about this, but when I was looking at the running backs, him and Najee Harris are just too close in ADP for my comfort. I do feel like Najee is going to come back this year. I feel like just last year was a down year for him and that offense altogether. Uh, we know they've got Arthur Smith there running the helm. We know how much he loves to run the ball. We saw it last year. Bijan was the guy. And we saw the previous year before Bijan, Tyler Algier and Cordarrelle Patterson had a great season combined between the two of them. And we didn't really see them be all that involved in that offense last year. It was literally Bijan was the guy. And then when they would finally decide to pass the ball, they would pass the ball. But when it came to the running backs, it was really just a one running back offense, regardless of the talent that they had behind Bijan. And I'm not saying the other guys behind him were at Bijan level, but we saw them perform very admirably the year before. Why weren't they getting any play last year, even though they played well the previous seasons? Well, it's because Arthur Smith just wanted their one guy to be their bell cow running back. And I think Najee's going to come back this year and have really a bounce back season. I think Najee could be one of the steals of this draft this year. Uh, and I think he's going to bounce back in a big way. I think he's going to be the guy. And I know Jalen Warren was the guy that was, catching all the balls out of the backfield last year. But like I said, I feel like Najee was a little bit dinged up. There was something else going on that we just don't know about. I feel like there was something else going on there. I feel like he's going to have a big bounce back season, and we don't know what to expect out of this offense now with a whole new offensive coordinator. So just with their gap in ADP, you've got Najee going 24th overall and Jalen Warren going 30th overall. You mean to tell me in a Steelers-led offense with Arthur Smith at the helm, they are going to support two top 30 running backs?
No. I think
No,
that
exactly.
leads to your earlier point that nobody knows what the fuck to do with these two guys. I think that's the issue. And people are just flipping a coin, I think, at this point.
But give me, like I said, I think Najee is going to come back this year. That's why I'm off of Jalen Warren. Not that he's a bad player at all, but I just feel like that this year we're going to see Najee from a couple years ago, and that's why he was being drafted so high last year, is because he had that great season the year before, and that's what we're going to come back and see this year.
Yeah, it's so hard. Like, if you look at last year, Jalen Warren exceeded Najee Harris in every fucking metric
Every
that
category,
has
I
ever
know.
existed. And yet, Arthur Smith is not the guy that I want to trust to utilize that information. And also, just some running backs are never the guy despite being awesome. It's the Lamar Miller conundrum. For years, Lamar Miller, if you're old enough to remember, with the Texans, with the Dolphins, with whoever, it's like,
Mhm.
give that man more touches. He's amazing. And then they gave that man more touches and he was bad. And that could be Jalen Warren to
Exactly.
some extent. Yeah.
It really could.
Hate being the smartest person in the NFL sometimes, Give me the coaching job, Arthur.
It's a burden. Oh, it's a burden, Jake.
It is tough.
So impart more of that knowledge on us, and who's your next player here?
I'm ready for this to be clipped out and for me to look like a complete dong water if this goes awry. But Lad McConkey, I don't get it. There's a couple of names I considered for this spot, some more high-profile names for the red flags. Thought about Justin Jefferson. I'll be honest, the training camp hype got me a little bit because it does seem like maybe Sam Darnold's actually going to play a little bit more than I expected this year. So I'm tempering off my own hate here for Justin Jefferson's ADP in favor of Ladd McConkey, who is a modest wide receiver 42. That's low down. So I might be splitting hairs talking about him, but let me just mention the Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman of it all, because it's been half of an episode since I brought these guys up. But in their entire run together in San Francisco, which lasted about 4 years, Harbaugh was coach, Roman was the OC. They never ranked higher than 29th in pass attempts. Now they had rushing capable quarterbacks. That's why I want to bring back the Justin Herbert comment from earlier. I'm softening on Herbert because if they do let him run more, he can be fine. He can be fine, but his pass catchers won't be. So the passes have to go to these guys in order for them to exceed expectations at all. And again, never higher than 29th in pass attempts. Just Greg Roman by himself without Harbaugh when Harbaugh went back to college. Still only ranked higher than 28th in pass attempts in his 10 years as offensive coordinator. Ladd McConkey in college. Smarter people than I can appreciate what he does as a route runner, and he's incredible at it. However, he still only received his best stat line in college, which was not last year, by the way, is the year prior. It was 58 receptions, 760 yards. I don't get it. Yeah, he was playing with Brock Bowers. Okay, I get that to some extent, but you can't get close to 1,000 yards all throughout college if you are one of these premier route runners. Something does not click for me. Something doesn't add up. Again, I'm not a specialist in rookies, but I'm going to take the historical bet of lackluster college production, bad offensive situation, and frankly, guys around him who I'm kind of softening on, like DJ Chark, Josh Palmer. I honestly think if there's a guy to own out of this backfield or manage out of this backfield, it's Josh Palmer. I don't even want Ladd McConkey at wide receiver 42 because, again, his upside seems capped to me. Here's the guys going around him. I would like to play this exercise with you. Of who would you rather draft?
And I was actually going to bring this up. So thank you.
Beautiful. Because I checked the ADP before, and again, I was like, am I too harsh? He's wide receiver 42. Give the kid a fucking break. And then I was like, oh, look at the guys that I have to choose between now. So right ahead of him, one spot, Deontay Johnson. We both knew who we were picking. We're picking Deontay Johnson.
Absolutely. And if you guys don't know who we're picking, you have not listened to the show enough over this offseason because we have been just spewing rainbows and unicorns about Deontay Johnson all offseason.
Right. So obviously Deontay Johnson. Then we got right after him or a couple spots after him, Christian Watson. Give me the Christian Watson upside. Mm-hmm. You and I might disagree a little bit on that. If he's healthy, he's the guy, in my opinion.
I agree. I agree. I've been coming around on Christian Watson this offseason. I was off of him early on, but as this offseason has kind of progressed, I've been changing my stance on that.
And then we get into some of his fellow rookies who we go, all right, maybe there is going to be a Puka Nacua type of guy that breaks out this year. Again, bets are against Ladd McConkey for me. We've got Xavier Worthy. Sure. I'm not a guy who's a big fan of making that bet for the Chiefs, but I'd be more willing to make that bet than this one. Who would you rather
have? I think I would take. God, it's really a toss-up. I guess I would lean Xavier Worthy just because we know that's going to be a much more pass-heavy offense, and they've been looking for that guy to replace Tyreek since he left. Not that they're a one-for-one replacement, but they've been searching for that wide receiver one since Tyreek left. So just give me the better offense and the fact that they've been searching for a true wide receiver one.
Yep.
Give me Xavier over McConkey.
And then Keon Coleman is right behind him. Now, I know he could be equally raw, or not equally raw. He could be more raw than Ladd McConkey is, but I trust that offense more to at least try to force feed him the ball. And as much as I love Curtis Samuel, you're not going to find many people more in on Curtis Samuel than I am. I'm also willing to admit there's some wiggle room in terms of who the number one pass catcher is on this offense. And it could end up being Keon Coleman. So for you, though, Ladd or Keon, do you have a strong stance?
I would probably lean Ladd, but it's just slightly. But I know
So
the
we disagree a
couple
little
guys
bit.
going right after that. You've got JSN, you got Brian Thomas. I mean, I'd take both of them easily over Ladd.
Well, that's interesting because
So it's
Brian
just,
Thomas is my Keon Coleman for you. That's where it's a toss up for me between those two. But yeah, I
I mean,
just don't get the
he's in
appeal.
the right area, but I would probably have him in that tier just slightly lower than the rest of those guys.
Yeah. I will try my chance if I need to at all on this offense with the backfield and maybe with Josh Palmer much later than Ladd McConkey. All right. Who do you have at wide receiver?
We both went with rookies here for our wide receivers. I've got Malik Neighbors here, which I thought was interesting. We both selected rookies here since rookies are typically guys that you want on your squad. You can typically draft them a little bit later. And then by the end of the season, they come on and really give you that value, uh, which I think Ladd McConkey could be one of those players. Malik Neighbors, where he's going right now in drafts, uh, he's really got to perform to return that value. He's currently wide receiver 24, which isn't crazy, but let's be honest, this Giants offense, there's not much to like about this. You've got Daniel Jones there, which yeah, he's flashed in the past, I guess, but you've lost what is your best weapon in Saquon Barkley, went to the division rivals, the Eagles. So you lost someone that you can depend on at least rushing the ball and taking a little bit of that pressure off the pass game, or he was just a good pass outlet. Uh, so then and I'm not, this has nothing to do with Malik Neighbors' talent by any stretch of the imagination. And we've seen wide receivers come into bad situations and still perform for fantasy. I still think he can perform for fantasy, but I think we need to temper our expectations for at least this season because the rest of that Giants offense is just god awful. I mean, they've got they've got 1,000 other wide receivers to throw to, but none that are
All
good.
of them in the slot.
Exactly. Your best tight end retired this offseason with Darren Waller. A lot of question marks behind him. I know they just drafted Theo Johnson. They've got hopes for him. Who was the other incumbent tight end there? Rookie from a couple years ago.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
he had an eye situation last year, which is the thing
yeah,
that really bummed me out. I can't think of it, and I feel bad, but I know who you're
me
talking
too.
about.
But I know there was hopes for him, but it's just
Mm.
like
Bellinger,
their
that's what it
defense
was.
isn't.
Daniel Bellinger.
Yes, thank you, Jake. Oh, your brain. I love your brain. Uh, the defense isn't great, which I mean could be good for the offense since they're going to have to be passing more. But I think just at wide receiver 24 for this season is just a little too rich for me. I just don't. There's just not a lot of upside. And for him to be able to finish there, a lot of things have to go the right way. Is he way out of line where it's just like, oh my God, it's just way no, but it's still just a little too rich for my blood. For Dynasty, I mean, it's just wheels up, like because he has that talent, and I could be totally shooting myself in the foot here. And after 3 weeks of the season, when he's got 500 yards and 5 touchdowns, I could be like, yeah, I was wrong about Neighbors, and it's making Daniel Jones look like an MVP candidate. But I'm not banking on that to be the actual case.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to be as nice as possible about Daniel Jones here. I'm gonna channel my inner Jim Halpert and say I think Daniel Jones will do as good this year as one could reasonably expect him to do in the situation, which is not well. And I do think Malik Neighbors looking full PPR. I might be okay with it. I'm not going to feel great about it because the guy, to your point, could end up with 200 targets. They're all going to be short yardage stuff, and he'll probably only get a chance to reasonably catch like 20% of them because he'll be bracketed by defenses every play. But, he could end up in full PPR being, I guess, okay. But yeah, I also don't see that upside for him to exceed that, unfortunately. It's rough.
Mhm. It is.
Rough
It
out
is.
there for elite quality wide receivers.
Exactly. Yeah, it makes me sad to say that because I love the talent and
Yeah.
I just hope he can supersede the situation. So, Jake,
Mhm.
we've saved tight ends for last, as we like to do, because hey, we love to punish ourselves at the end of a podcast. So, why don't you lay on me who your tight end red flag is for this season?
Let's get this self-flagellation underway. I'm actually going to break from the mold. We're going to have a threesome here in my tight end
Ooh.
slot. That's right. You heard me.
Ooh.
It's a tight end threesome. And we have a cluster of dudes all going back to back to back in current ADP that I don't want any part of. Their names are Dallas Goedert, Dalton Schultz, and Cole Kmet. Again, not unreasonably priced from an ADP standpoint. They are tight ends 13 through 15. I find there's often like a theme in how I do these things. A couple of weeks ago with the underrated dynasty guys, I was all looking at youth, nary an old guy in sight. Now I'm looking all at these ones towards the middle of drafts. And sometimes you do win your draft in the middle. I think we give a lot of focus to the guys up top, and rightfully so.
Hmm.
But these decisions often make or break your year. And Goddard, Schultz, and Komet last year finished in an identical cluster almost. They were tight ends 10, 11, and 12. So slightly better than what their current ADP is. But I always default to this. I think we should just get branding from Coop at this point. But Andrew Cooper, noted tight end enthusiast, dare I say guru, wants you to draft a tight end that at least has a shot at being the number 2 target on their own team. Not one of these guys has that. Not one of them is even close, in my opinion, without a whole bunch of injuries, breaking that way for them to be a top 2 target. Dwayne McFarland from Fantasy Life, got a shout out, projects for the Eagles with the Kellen Moore change at offensive coordinator that A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith could both very well have massive years and maybe look a little bit more like Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle over in Miami because of the way that they're utilized. Now add in Saquon Barkley to that backfield, who almost as capable, if not outright as capable as DeAndre Swift in the pass catching department. You can quibble over that, I suppose, but they're basically 1A and 1B, however you flip it. And as a pure rusher, he's just better. So I think they will be leaning on the running game more with Saquon there this year. Dallas Goedert, again, you got to hope that other dudes get injured. Otherwise, he's going to be left in the dust and there's no upside. Dalton Schultz, last year, there was some avenue for him because of the injuries with a bunch of the guys there. I looked at his splits with and without Noah Brown because Noah Brown was like their break glass and in case of emergency wide receiver. When he played with Noah Brown, meaning a bunch of the other guys were injured, he averaged 2.5 points per game more, and an extra 20 plus yards and an extra half a touchdown every single game. That's what he benefited from. Now we've got Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and even Joe Mixon, who's a better pass catcher out of that backfield, as you alluded to earlier, than what they had there last year. Bad for Dalton Schultz. Cole Kmet has never had 2 quality pass catchers to contend with in the same season. Never happened. His rookie year, prime-ish Allen Robinson, and then last year, DJ Moore. But now it's DJ Moore, it's Keenan Allen, it's rookie Roma Dunze. They're even bringing over the offensive coordinator's favorite pal tight end, Gerald Everett, who's literally followed the dude from team to team to team. It's bad for all of them. Can they get you by? Sure, but why do you want to just get by with tight end? If you draft one of these guys, you're going to feel locked into them. You're probably not going to explore the other options that could break out on waivers and play that game of at least trying to get more than 7 points per game from that slot on your roster. I don't want to mess with that. that just seems like accepting mediocrity. And I feel like I deserve better for tight ends, despite me always being bad at evaluating tight ends. Dustin, what do you think?
I follow the logic. Um, eh, yeah, Cole Kmet, I'm totally out on this year. Like that is a guy just totally off my radar, 100%. Goddard, I have a hard time getting on board with, and Dalton Schultz, just because of the pass catchers ahead of them. I think they are way more talented, but the situations they're in just aren't lending themselves to be major target guys on their team. So yeah, I feel like they're appropriately valued at this point, but I mean, I think looking at the ADP right now, I mean, there's guys that are going below them that if I was kind of punting the position and waiting, I would rather take a chance on Fryermuth, Musgrave, Conklin. Hell, even give me Isaiah Likely. I mean, I think there's a world where he could be seeing the field even with Andrews on the field. They could be running more two tight end sets, utilizing the best players that they have on the squad. So I would rather take a chance on those guys a little bit later than those ones just they're in the middle. They'll be fine. Like you can put them in your lineup. Like you said, they'll get you 7 to 10 points a week. It'll be okay, but they're never going to win you a week because that's just not going to happen. Like there's zero upside. So I'd rather wait a little bit than get some guys that I perceive to have more upside or could have weekly blow up weeks for you than the guys that are just like, okay, yeah, they're there.
Because not to harp on it, but you're going to have to decide between some of these guys and Deontay Johnson. I'm just telling you, they're all in the same bracket in terms of ADP. You're going to have to make that decision. And we know 10 times out of 10 which way we're going to lean. Yeah, give me Zach Ertz for 5 games, hopefully, to start the season with top 2 earning, potential, or Greg Dulcich, hoping that he stays healthy. And again, if they don't, fine, I'll stream the position. Not in our home league because we only get like 12 pickups, but in a normal league, you can just stream that position and not have to worry about it. Yeah.
So before I hit my final tight end here, Jamie in the chat says, I like the value of Devonta Smith. He's one of the targets for him. And so go on to say Smith would be a top 10 wide receiver if AJ Brown wasn't there. I agree with the second part. If AJ Brown wasn't there, he would be an easy target for me and would be top 10. But he is not a target for me this year. I think we've talked about that. Well, for sure, when we did our divisional breakdown, talking about the NFC East, I just think AJ Brown is the man there, and there's not a lot of opportunity. And I just don't want to play the game with Devonta Smith on which weeks he may or may not be fed the ball when we know every single week AJ Brown is going to be the guy.
It's nicer to not
Do you
have to play
disagree?
the game. I'm softening a little bit because of Kellen Moore coming over. And, I read some of this hype again, Dwayne McFarland talking about maybe he's the Waddle in this offense if healthy. And it's like, all right, that's interesting. But yeah, I mean, it's AJ Brown. And then I'm not going to roster both. And damn sure I'm not going to not roster AJ Brown. So my decision's made up. I can't do anything. My hands are tied.
There you go. All right, then let's finish up here with tight ends. Oh, excuse me. Bug just
Peach
flew
is
into
coming
my mouth.
back up. Oh, I thought it was the peach beer
the
coming
bug.
back up.
No, the peach beer is delicious. It would never do me dirty like that. All right. I guess the world just didn't want me to talk poorly about this tight end here. As soon as I was getting ready to say his name, a bug flies in my mouth. That was weird. But my tight end is David Njoku. I know he had a great season last year. Finished as the tight end 5 last year, which is terrific. We love that. Currently, right now, he is being drafted as the tight end 9. I feel like things have to go really, really well for this Browns offense and for him in particular to repeat that tight end or to reach that tight end 9. He's in that same tier as the guys you just were listing off for me. because I'm going to go through his fantasy weeks for you. All right. Throughout the season. And Joe Flacco didn't come on board until week 13. All right. So he had 2.4, 2.8, 2, 4.6 bye week, 2.4, 5.4, 13.7 in week 8, 8.6, 5.8, 5.6, 5.9, 1.7 in week 13. Then week 14 on 21.1, 16.4, 10.4, 11.4. Joe Flacco loved targeting David Njoku. We could see in the early part of the season, Deshaun Watson was not targeting him. He only got over 10 PPR points per game once in that stretch. Just once. Is that a guy that you want to be taking as the tight end 9? I don't see an area or a reason that he should be going that high. We've got Amari Cooper, who we've already talked about this offseason, I'm much higher on than I think consensus is. They brought over Jerry Jeudy. Say what you want about him. He had that high draft capital. Maybe a change of scenery will be good for him. We don't know. They have Elijah Moore. I'm still hopeful that he could be a thing, even though I know it's probably not going to be a thing. So don't crucify me for that. But I still have hopes that maybe he could turn things around. And this offense just likes to run. They're just a more run heavy offense. And I think last year was an outlier for Njoku. All these years we were talking about him being this high end talent coming out of that draft class, and he didn't do anything year after year after year. And it took 150-year-old Joe Flacco to throw him the ball, and just because he couldn't get the ball downfield anymore to get Joku involved. So without Flacco there, I don't see Watson targeting him. We didn't see it last year. I don't understand the hype around it.
Yeah, man. Look, the only reason I haven't talked about David Njoku already is because you got to the show sheet first. David Njoku is my number one avoid at tight end. My number one avoid. Put another way, before Joe Flacco, he was averaging 10 PPR points per game, on pace for like 750 yards, 3 touchdowns. Reasonable tight end shit, that's fine. But after Joe Flacco, 18 and a half PPR points, on pace for 1,300 yards, 14 touchdowns. That shit's not going to happen this year. It just can't. A 7th-year breakout for a tight end, we've seen this story before as well. It does not play out well in the long term. So even without the Joe Flacco of it all, I'd still be dubious about what David Njoku did in his 7th season all of a sudden in the back half of it. But yeah, man, I'm out. I'd still rather, if his ADP was nestled in with the other guys that I was talking about, I'd rather take the chance at David Njoku than those guys. That's not saying a lot. I'd still rather avoid.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Jake, that concludes our red flags. That was every position. We both nailed it. How are you feeling? Was this a good release for you? Do you feel good about this, or do you feel like we did our listeners well here and giving them some good advice about guys to avoid?
But nobody
At
wants to talk
ADP, not
negative.
avoid, but
Yeah.
well,
Nobody wants to spend the whole time talking negatively, but it's not all
it
roses
wasn't
and
all negative.
unicorns in fantasy football. No, but I just mean in general, like, don't you draft
I
this guy? Don't you draft this guy at current cost? But yeah, I think it's necessary information. And I think a lot of the way you win fantasy leagues is often who you don't draft just as much as who you do.
Mhm.
So we got to talk about it.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that'll do it for this week, folks. One of our favorite episodes of the off season is coming up next week with our drinking buddies. Guys, we are planting our flags on that these are going to be our guys for the season. So that's going to be a great one, where we talked a little bit more negative this week. Next week's just going to be all fucking positive, and it's going to be great. But before we get to all that, we got to get through this week. Enjoy the Hall of Fame game on Thursday. For any of your off-season questions here as we're getting into redraft season, if you have any trade questions, for your dynasty leagues as they're maybe starting to get a little bit more active, hit us up. Hit up my partner at Jake Trowbridge. You can find me at FF Dusty Dog. You can find the podcast at Drinking Fantasy. Any one of those, we'll answer your questions. We'll get right back to you. Better yet, follow us on YouTube, subscribe, get the notification when we go live. We stream live every single Tuesday evening. You can get in the chat like Jamie, like Albert, and we'll answer your questions in the chat live, so you don't even have to wait for an answer. Go out and give us a rate and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. It helps others find us, which we appreciate. And that'll do it for this week, folks. And until next week, keep drinking and talking fantasy football.
Cheers, FFers.